Tuning in with KrASIA, bringing human stories to life. Welcome to KrASIA's Tuning In series. I'm Emily Fang, your host for this podcast episode. Today I get to chat with Christine Wang, a multicultural professional helping companies on innovation and cross-border strategies between Asia and the rest of the world. She speaks 5 different languages and has lived and worked in multiple countries, including China, the US, Germany, Singapore, and South Africa. She is an entrepreneur, consultant, and leader with 10 plus years of experience in strategy, business model innovation, and commercial and go-to-market execution. She is currently the head of Asia for the Singapore-based Lufthansa Innovation Hub. Previously, she was a China CEO of Meero, a French AI startup, project leader at BCG Digital Ventures, and global leadership associate at Alibaba. Outside of her career, Christine is an avid documentary photographer and accomplished violinist. She is truly a woman who pushes her own boundaries with curiosity. So Christine, what does it mean to push the boundaries of self? Was this something that was cultivated during your youth, or was there something that had triggered this mental mind shift?
Sure, that's actually quite a big question, to be honest. I actually think that it really comes down to motivation and your drive, right? And so for me personally, it has always been curiosity. So I was always really curious and open-minded towards new things, trying out new things, and also really daring to just not care about what other people would think, but really trying it out. And coming back to where this is coming from, I think, being Chinese, but growing up in Germany definitely had an influence on that. I think there was always a part of me that wanted to belong and kind of trying to become more German, if you want. And then actually realizing that the more I tried, the less I actually belonged. And so in a way, pushing my boundaries was sort of like experimenting with myself. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the whole idea of not caring what other people think, I think that's such a muscle that people need to exercise and use. So for you, extending on that question, how do you exercise that? Or how do you make yourself not care?
Yeah, so to be honest, I think growth really comes from struggling, to be honest, right? Self-growth, right? When we talk about pushing your boundaries, it's really about you have to sort of have that struggle in order to grow. What I mean by that, for me personally, so when I was 20, actually, my dad passed away very young, and I think that to me was a very impactful life event. And I mention this because I think this is where I really started to reflect more and really understand that, oh man, we're not invincible. And I think when you're really that young, you kind of feel invincible. You feel death is a concept from Hollywood. And I think for myself, what I realized is time is the most valuable thing we have. So if you ask me what is it that really drives me in life, it's really making the most out of my time. And making most of my time essentially means to care less about people and what other people think about me, and to really think about what are the things that I want to do. And I think that really comes from my dad.
Yeah. I'm sorry that, that happened to you at such a young age. I do think that time is really valuable, and not a lot of us recognize that until something happens. But, I've read your bio and the things that you've done and the way that you've utilized your time. You've probably accomplished way more than, people at 80 have done. So, yeah, extending on that, you've definitely not pigeonholed yourself in any role or archetype, right from photography and, being a violinist and doing engineering and business development. How did you develop the courage to explore these pursuits? And what do you do when you start self-doubting yourself?
Good questions. So maybe just also extending on my answer, I think there has always been a natural curiosity, and then obviously it was coupled with some of the struggles around self-identity, how to fit into a German society as a Chinese-looking person. But then also expanding on the fact that I really early on realized, okay, my time is very finite, and there are a lot of different things that I wanted to do, such as skydiving, for example.
Yeah, I should skydive.
Traveling. And I think in a way, when I think about like, I guess like what other people typically take away from it is like, obviously I don't wish anyone to have to go through such a struggle.
Yeah.
But I think there's something around comfort zone and being out of the comfort zone, right? So I think ever since that happened with my dad, I've always put myself a bit out of the comfort zone, right? So I started traveling. I don't know, lived in 8 countries, different countries, and really with this open-mindedness, really try to understand other people and what they care about, and really put myself out there. And I think that really enabled me to adopt a lot of different things and not really follow a path that everyone else was like following.
Yeah, you're definitely like an unconventional Asian. I guess one thing I'm curious about too, like most recently, what has been the most recent uncomfortable thing you've done?
The most uncomfortable thing, probably circuit breaker.
Say. Oh gosh.
And it was uncomfortable because, I think I always try not to fall into a routine. I think routine essentially means being in a comfort zone, and being in the comfort zone means no growth, right? You need that bit of a shake up, that creative flow, that creative chaos. And I think during circuit breaker, you didn't have that, or I didn't have that. And so I felt really trapped, to be honest, because typically every month I would travel to like at least 2 places. And so I had to find ways to really create that chaos in my mind almost.
I guess like now that we're still in the midst of COVID, how are you channeling those creative juices, and like, what are you working on then?
So for me, what works well is I have a lot of different side interests and businesses and projects. That's what keeps me quite entertained. So I just recently bought a piano, for example.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually really nice because I don't really play piano. I can dabble around, but so that's like one alley. I picked up oil painting again. That's another one. And then I have all these like side projects, like my gallery that I want to like start here in Singapore. I'm also dabbling with some startup ideas with some other friends. But most recently, I've also started just like organizing small random dinners. So in my network, I would just like put people together and like just have a nice dinner and nice conversation. So for example, I've actually organized a banana dinner, which is essentially Asians that are non-Asians. Right? Like it's like, they're yellow outside but white inside. I know this is probably in our time not appropriate to say. But anyways, my point being like we had such interesting conversations around self-identity. For example, I had a Guatemalan, Taiwanese friend sitting there, Italian, Korean friend, right? Like, and it's so interesting to have these type of conversations with this type of crowd. And then, I would do like a female empowered dinner, for example. And that's where I really get that creative flow flowing. Creative juice flowing. Yeah.
So I think when you said banana, I thought you meant like everything at the dinner was made out of bananas. I was like, whoa. But I love that. I think it's like dinner with like thoughtfulness put behind it, right? Because most people, when they go out and eat, they're just like, talk about like, daily things, or talk about things that are, nonsensical or a little bit more shallow. But it's more of like you are purposefully putting people together to bounce ideas off of each other and discuss topics that really matter to everyone's core. So that's great. And I might, use that idea as well. So I guess, for you now, what values are important to you, right? And do they continue to evolve and change? Because you are constantly evolving and changing. And, you've traveled so much and you're hopping from, country to country, but I guess like what values are important to you right now in this moment?
So, I work for an airline, and I think the airline has been hit quite badly by COVID. And I think what I've experienced over the last couple of weeks and months is crisis management. And I think in times of a crisis, that's really when the true face of all the people come out, right? And it's really the time where I think leadership matters so much. And when I think about leadership, I think the most important thing that I realize and really is important to me is authenticity, right? So authenticity to me essentially means to really be centered with yourself and actually also show vulnerability. And I think that's something that people don't show enough in our world today, where you essentially tell everyone, look, I don't have the answer, but this is how I think about it, and this is how I feel about it, and this is what I promise you guys, right? So I think authenticity is something that I very much strive for, or like, which I find very important. And to really have that self introspection. In terms of my travels, and I guess like living in so many different places have taught me, I think, again, coming back to this notion of like struggle and being in the comfort zone, I think that traveling part really helps me to, you know, keep reminding myself to challenge the status quo of something, right? So I don't typically adopt a thought or a belief just because everyone else is like following it, but like I would have that type of reflection to really think about it and build my own position or view on it. And I can do that because I travel so much and because I see a lot of different ways of living and a lot of different systems or value systems.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you're so right in being very authentic to yourself, right? And I think for you, you're constantly evolving and changing, and maybe the only constant thing that you can hold dear and near is like your own authenticity, because that's the person that you really have control over, right? I guess, what advice would you also give to those who are like, not, maybe they don't want to become you, but they're like, oh, there are parts of, great qualities that they would want to also, be able to be more daring and be more empowered and be more authentic. Like what advice would you give them?
I think two things. I think, again, creating those opportunities of growth, right? So it's almost like you put yourself out there. You're trying something that you feel uncomfortable with. And this is really where you start to reach that aspiration. I think that's number one. Number two is self-introspection. So really being very honest with yourself and really sitting down with yourself. And actually, I've been reading this book, which I really love. It's called Reboot.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, but it sounds like a great book already. I like Reboot.
So it's this guy who calls himself a startup CEO coach. Okay. So as a CEO of any type of company, you're always like under a lot of pressure. And the book is really great, but I think what's even greater is at each chapter he also has like some homework questions for yourself. And I think answering these questions for yourself are really great. So for example, he asked like what is it that runs you down, or what are ways that you run yourself down and exhaust yourself, right? And really sitting there and answering those questions honestly for yourself, I think is very powerful. Another question is, for example, where are you running from and where to?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And or how are you complicit in the type of life that you never wanted? Okay. Right? So I think those are very deep questions, and I think those questions are the right questions to ask to really like sit down and become really authentic with yourself. So that's a book I really recommend, which I think is very helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that recommendation. I think, especially, now that I have more time on my hands, I also want to read more as well. And in a way, I think books that allow you to sit and make you write, it helps a lot, because they've also said that just being introspective and writing things down, it makes you be okay. It makes you be more okay with being by yourself. And I think during COVID, not a lot of people are okay being by themselves or with their own thoughts. Yeah. So I think that's great. I guess, so just to kind of wrap this up, and as my last question, what are your forward-looking thoughts, right? As you are continuously pushing the boundaries of self, what's your next move And, I know you've done all these things already, but yeah, like what's the next move of Christine's life?
Wow, that's a big question also. I think for me, the next couple of years is all about living up to my full potential. I think my 20s were always guided by proving myself, right? And then now you've built your great career, you have all of these brand names on your CV, you kind of have this like gap now. You're like, okay, what's next, right? And I think for me personally, just because I'm also very creative, I would love to be able to like build this brand of being an artist. I want to give back through building communities of people, and I don't know. I think having more control over my time again, right? And being able to use that time and the freedom that comes with, earning money, to really, I don't know, do things such as travel more once COVID is over, hopefully at some point, right? I don't know, maybe start a brand in the food space. That could be interesting. I've always wanted to have a coffee shop, maybe something along those lines. Like some of those passion projects is I think what I'd love to like expand on a bit more.
Yeah, no, that's great. And one thing I've seen too, like with COVID, and I keep talking about COVID, sorry, but it's been an accelerator for a lot of the things that we wanted to do, right? Because as you mentioned, like time is fleeting and it's hit a lot of us, and it's like, why shouldn't I do that passion project? Like, why shouldn't I open a coffee shop? So, if you do open a coffee shop, I will be one of your great customers. So I'll be there. But yeah, thanks so much. I think this has been such a great conversation, and I look forward to, the future topics that we discuss in person. So
thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks, Christine.